924. We found these records in a lead box, beneath the roots of an oak tree in Northumbria. This is the confession of a Viking named Bjorn, a diary of a soul seeking light in the darkest times of the North. Listen to his voice.
If you hold these scraps of parchment in your hands, it means the gods have either forgotten me or finally shown mercy by letting my words outlive my body. My name is Bjorn. In the halls of the Jarls, they called me the Iron One. But now, as I write this by the light of a flickering wick, I feel like nothing more than an old tree that is held against the wind for far too long. My life did not begin with a lullaby. It began with the scream of gulls and the crunch of ice under the keel of my father's boat. I was born in a narrow fjord where the sun is but a rare guest that never stays for long. My father, Thorson, was a man whose heart was made of the same granite as our rocks. He did not teach me how to love. He taught me how to survive. I remember my 8th birthday. Other children might have received toys, but Thorson led me to the edge of a cliff where the scene below boiled like a furious beast. He looked at me with his faded, cold eyes and simply pushed me into the abyss. I fell for eternity, feeling my heart beat against my ribs. The frozen water burned my lungs, and 10,000 needles stabbed my skin. I was drowning. I saw the sunlight fading somewhere above, behind the water's depth. But deep inside, in my very core, a rage awoke. I did not want to give that old bastard the pleasure of seeing my death. I swam up. I clawed at the slippery rocks with my nails, bleeding my fingers until I crawled onto the shore, gasping and blue from the cold. My father didn't even offer a hand. He just threw me my first knife and said, "Now you are a man, Bjorn. Never expect the world to warm you. Warm yourself with fire or with blood." From that day, I became part of a great death machine. At 14, I went on my first raid. There were 30 of us in a cramped DR Acker. Do you know what the Skalds do not sing about in their grand songs? They don't sing about how the boat stinks when 30 unwashed men sit shoulder to shoulder for weeks. They don't sing about the lice biting you under your woolen shirt, or how your gums bleed from scurvy until you spit your own teeth into the sea. It wasn't romance. It was dirty, heavy work. We rode for hours, days, months. My hands became so calloused that I stopped feeling hot or cold. I became the Iron One because I could row when others fell unconscious. But inside me, an emptiness grew. Every time we attacked another peaceful village, I saw the same thing: fire, screams, chaos. I killed because I had to. I remember my first axe swing at an enemy. It wasn't like a heroic dance. It was G. The smell of a slit belly, the warm blood splashing into your eyes, and the way a man looks at you in his last second, with such wild astonishment, as if asking, "For what?" By the time I was 30, I had everything a Viking dreams of: gold in a chest, Florian songs, and the respect of warriors. I had women, slaves we captured, or widows seeking protection, but I never felt them. To me, they were like food or ale, a way to quench hunger, but not the thirst of the soul. I took their bodies, but I never touched their hearts. I was lonely in a crowd, a wolf among dogs. I began to hate the sea, that endless gray horizon that promised only more blood. I looked at my Bearthers in arms. They laughed, drank sour ale, bragged about their scars, but I saw only fear in their eyes. The fear that they would leave nothing behind but a pile of bones in a foreign land. I often sat on the prow of the ship at night when everyone was asleep. The sea around was black as tar, and the stars in the sky seemed cold and indifferent. I asked myself, is this all there is to life, Odin? Just killing so you won't be killed? Taking so you won't be left with empty hands? It felt as though I had already died, and my body was just moving out of habit. The world back then was unfair. If you were born weak, you were a slave. If you were a woman, you were property. If you were a warrior, you were a tool. I was a very good tool, but even the strongest iron begins to rust if it isn't touched by warmth. I didn't know what tenderness was. To me, that word was a synonym for weakness, and weakness in our world meant death. My comrades said I thought too much. "Drink, Bjorn. Fight, Bjorn. Take the women, Bjorn." They shouted, but I felt that somewhere beyond the mists, there was something else. Some other force, not as destructive as Thor's hammer. We were preparing for a great raid on Northumbria. Our Jarl, Eric the Crooked, promised us so much gold that we could forge new lives from it. But I knew Eric. To him, gold smelled sweeter than the lives of his men. He was a cruel man who could beat a warrior to death just for not cleaning his shield properly. And I was his right hand, his best killer. I remember when we set sail. The wind was strong. The sail swelled like the chest of a giant. I looked at my shore disappearing in the haze, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to come back. I felt that this journey would change everything, that the sea would finally bring me either final peace under the water, or something that would make my frozen heart tremble. I was ready for battle. I was ready for death. But I was completely unready to meet a woman whose gaze would be sharper than my sword, and whose pride would make me, a hardened killer, feel like a little boy thrown into the frozen water once again. Fate had already set its nets. We sailed to the shores of Britain, not knowing that there, among the ash and smoke, my ruin awaited me, or my true birth. I was Bjorn the Iron One, and I thought nothing could break me. I was wrong. Love does not break you. It reforges you, like an old sword, to create something entirely new. And that forging, it hurts more than any wound. I felt the air smell of rain and future blood. My heart, which I thought was stone, began to beat a little faster. 924 was the year when the wolf first saw the moon, not as a target, but as we landed in Northumbria at dawn, when the fog was so thick it felt as though we were sailing not on water, but through the milk of the gods themselves. But within that milk, death was hiding. We came to a settlement the locals called Leeds. For them, it was home. For us, just another dot on the map, a place to feed our greed. I remember the smell of that morning. It was the smell of damp earth, rotting straw, and the fear that always runs ahead of the raiders. Eric the Crooked gave the order. Take everything that glitters and kill anyone who holds a knife. It was routine. We burst into the village like a pack of wolves into a sheepfold. The screams, the neighing of horses, the cracking of door latches. It had been the symphony of my life for 20 years. I walked through the smoke, axe on my shoulder, feeling a strange weariness. I didn't want to kill. I just wanted the day to be over. I pushed open the door of a stone hut on the outskirts. It stood apart from the others, hidden behind bushes of old elderberry. I expected to find a trembling peasant or a heap of gold, but instead I saw her, Estrid. She was not hiding under the bed. She was not wailing in terror. She stood in the middle of the room, her back straight as a queen's, though she wore only a simple dress of rough gray linen. In her hands was a bread knife, small, almost ridiculous against my battle axe. But her eyes, gods, I have seen the eyes of berserkers in the heat of battle. I have seen the eyes of dying kings, but I have never seen so much pure, undiluted rage in a woman's gaze. She looked at me as if I were the hunted beast, not her. Her hair, the color of ripe wheat, had escaped her cap and fell in strands over a face smudged with soot. She shouted something in her tongue, sharp, hissing, unintelligible to me. I took a step forward, and she did not flinch. She swung that little knife, trying to reach my throat. I easily grabbed her wrist. It was so thin, I was afraid I might break it with my rough fingers. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. Outside, houses were burning. My brothers were dividing spoils and raping women, but I stood in the shadows of a little hut, holding the hand of a woman who wanted me dead. And instead of ending her suffering with one blow, I felt the ice in my chest crack. I let go of her hand and simply walked out, closing the door. I took a charcoal from a fire nearby and drew the mark of my kin on the door of our aim, the sign that this house belonged to Bjorn the Iron One, and no one had the right to enter without my leave. It was madness. It was treason against my Jarl, but I did not care. For the next 10 days, our realm of war stood camped near the village. I began to visit her every evening when the camp sank into a drunken sleep. I brought her food. At first, it was dried meat, then fresh bread I traded silver coins for with our cook. She met me with silence. For the first 3 days, she would not even touch the food in my presence. She sat in the corner, huddled, watching my every move like a wounded lynx. I simply sat on the floor by the door, laid my axe beside me, and remained silent. I wanted nothing from her. I just needed to be in her space. There, beside her, it did not smell of blood. It smelled of lavender she was drying from the ceiling, and of clean fire. On the 4th day, she approached. I brought her a handful of hazelnuts. She took one, cracked it with her teeth, and looked at me. In her gaze, there was no more hatred. There was wonder. "Why?" she asked. It was the first word I heard from her. The Saxon why. I did not know how to answer. I simply pointed to my scars, and then to her heart. We had no shared language, but we had shared pain. Our meetings became my personal heaven and my personal hell. By day, I was the right hand of Eric the Crooked. I had to be cruel. I had to punish those who disobeyed. I had to plan the next attacks. I saw how unfair our world was built. Women were mere trophies, no different from cattle or pots. Eric laughed while telling how he treated the daughter of a local thane, and in those moments, I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I saw this filth, this dirty vulgarity of strength, and I wanted to wash my hands in boiling water. But at night, I went to Estrid. We learned to understand each other. I taught her Norse words. She taught me Saxon ones. We drew images in the ash near the stove. Home, sea, bread, child. She told me, with gestures and stray words, that her husband was killed on the first day. He was a warrior, but he could not protect them. She was left alone in a world where a lonely woman is nothing but prey. Once, it was on the 20th day, a storm began. Thunder rumbled as if Thor himself had descended to earth to punish us for our sins. I came to her all wet, shivering from the cold. She did not let me sit by the door. She took my hand and led me to the fire. She removed my heavy leather cloak and began to wipe my hair with a dry cloth. It was unbearable. Her touch was so light, so gentle, I almost wanted to scream. I, a man who had withstood dozens of wounds, could not withstand the warmth of her hands. I caught her fingers, pulled her close, and kissed her for the first time. It was not the kiss of a conqueror. It was the kiss of a drowning man who finally found the shore. She answered me with the same desperation. We made love on the floor of her little hut, on an old woolen blanket. It was rough, for our lives were rough, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. Her skin smelled of rain and life. That night, I knew I could never leave her. But reality was cruel. We could not simply be together. I was an invader, she was a prisoner. Every time I left her house, I had to put on a mask of Iron Bjorn again. I saw how other warriors looked at me. They began to suspect something. Grim the Sly, a man with the face of a ferret and the soul of a snake, was always lurking near her house. He saw my mark on the door, and envy burned in his eyes. He wanted what was mine, not because he needed Estrid, but because he wanted to humiliate me. We met secretly by the river when the fog became our ally. Those minutes were stolen from death itself. We sat under a weeping willow, hidden in its branches like birds. Estrid brought me apples from an abandoned orchard, and I brought her jewelry I took from my own comrades, passing it off as war spoils. I remember how she once took my hand, placed it on her waist, and said, "Bjorn, if you leave, I will die. Not from a sword, but from the emptiness. I held her so tight I heard her ribs crack. I whispered into her hair, "I will not leave. I would rather burn all the ships of our fleet than leave you here alone." Those were not just words. It was an oath I gave not to the gods, but to the only human who made me alive. We planned our escape. We knew it was almost impossible. Around us were Viking patrols, and beyond, hostile Saxon lands where I would be killed on sight. But we believed that somewhere beyond the hills, there was a place where no one would ask where we came from. I began to notice how Eric the Crooked looked at me during feasts. In his gaze, there was no more respect, only the cold curiosity of a spider watching a fly. "You have become quiet, Bjorn," he said to me one evening, wiping greasy H-hand on his beard. "They say you found yourself a Saxon, which who drank your strength. Maybe I should take a look at her." My heart dropped into my stomach. I forced myself to laugh and answered, "She just cooks well, Jarl. But if you want, you can try her bread. It is as stale as my life." Eric remained silent, but I knew time was running out. That night, I went to Estrid for the last time as a free man. We did not make love. We just sat, holding hands, listening to the wind whistling in the cracks of the walls. She gave me her small amulet, a wooden cross on a string. I did not believe in her god, but I believed in her. I hid it under my mail, right next to my heart. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "tomorrow night, when the moon hides behind a cloud, we will go to the river. There will be a boat." She nodded, her eyes shining with tears. She trusted me. She entrusted her life to a killer whose hands were in the blood of her people. I walked out of her house with the premonition of freedom. But as I returned to the camp, I saw Grim the Sly. He stood in the shadow of a great oak and smiled. That smile was like a slit across the throat. "Lovely night for a walk, is it not, Bjorn?" he hissed. "It is a pity that the Jarl very much dislikes being deceived." I understood everything in that second. The treason had already happened. The trap had closed. I leaped at him, but 4 more warriors emerged from the darkness. It was not a fight for honor. It was an execution. They beat me with sword hilts, kicked me with heavy boots. I saw the sky above the village suddenly turn red. It was not the dawn. It was the village on fire. Eric had begun the cleansing. The last thing I felt was a sharp pain in my side and the smell of burning. I screamed her name, but my voice was lost in the roar of the flames and the laughter of those I once called brothers. I fell into the mud, feeling the warm blood draining from me, taking with it all my dreams of a quiet life. I saw the fire surge up to the hut with the mark of my kin, and I could do nothing. I was Iron Bjorn, who finally learned that iron does not cry. It simply turns to ash when the heat is too strong. 3,800 words of our love burned that night along with leads, and I prayed to all the gods I knew that Estrid had time to get out, that she did not become part of this ash. For if she perished, the world would forever remain dark, and no Valhalla could ever comfort me. They say before death a man sees his whole life. A lie. When you lie in the mud, and your former brothers in arms are driving their heels into your ribs, you see nothing but a red mist and your own helplessness. I heard my mail crack under the blows of Eric's hammer. I heard Grim the Sly laughing. That sound was like the crunch of a dry bone. "Look at our Iron One," Eric shouted, his voice drowning out the roar of the fire. He traded his axe for the skirt of a Saxon witch. Did he think he could betray the pack and remain a wolf? No, you are just dung now, Bjorn. Dung with which we will fertilize this cursed land. They left me to die. Eric did not want to give me a quick death by the sword. He wanted me to bleed out slowly, watching everything I held dear burn to the ground. They threw my body beyond the fence, into a ditch with slops and horse dung. Grim's last blow struck my temple, and the world went dark. I fell into a void where there were no gods, no heroes, only a cold, sticky silence. I do not know how long I spent in that nothingness. Maybe an hour, maybe an eternity. When I opened one eye, the other was swollen with blood, and it turned into pure pain. The sky was no longer red. It was black, choked with heavy smoke. The air was so hot that every breath burned my lungs. Leads had turned into a vast bonfire. I tried to move, and a wild scream stuck in my throat. Steel had gone through my rib, and every movement felt as if someone was slowly turning a RH knife inside my guts. I was broken. My body, which I had hardened for so long, betrayed me. I lay in the mud mixed with my own blood, and for the first time in my life, I wept, not from the pain, but from the injustice, from the fact that the world is such a foul place, where love is punished with death and loyalty with treason. Estrid, I rasped. My lips were smashed, and my mouth tasted of iron and ash. I began to crawl. It did not look like the movement of a warrior. I resembled a crushed worm dragging its guts across the earth. Every inch cost me my consciousness. I dug my fingers into the wet earth, pushed with my good leg, and fell face first into the dirt again. I saw death around me in its worst form. There lay the old blacksmith I had traded a knife with only yesterday. His head was split like an overripe pumpkin. There was the woman who once gave me water. She lay with her clothes torn and glassy eyes staring into the void. This was what we did. This was who I was. And now I saw the price of my glory. Every person killed in this village was on my conscience, for I had led these beasts here. I was part of this horror, and now this horror was devouring me. It was a fair reckoning, but that did not make it any easier. I crawled to the remains of the hut where Estrid lived. The roof had already collapsed, the walls were smoldering, sending sparks into the sky. I did not see her body among the ruins, and that gave me a tiny glimmer of hope that hurt worse than any wound. Where are you? I screamed inside myself, for I could only wheeze out loud. Suddenly, I felt hands touch my shoulders. I flinched, expecting the final blow of a sword. I was ready. I wanted it to be over. But instead of cold steel, I felt warmth. And the smell. It was the smell of lavender mixed with smoke. It was her, Estrid. She looked like a ghost. Her face black with soot. Her hair singed at the ends. Her dress turned to rags. She was weeping, but they were the quiet, terrible tears of someone who had seen the end of the world. Bjorn. Oh gods, Bjorn. She fell to her knees beside me. I wanted to tell her to run, that I was dead weight that would only drag her down, that I was not worth her tears, nor her salvation. But she would not listen. This small woman, who weighed hardly more than my battle shield, wrapped her arms around me and began to prattle. It was madness. Viking patrols were lurking nearby, finishing off the survivors. Eric the Crooked could return at any moment, but Estrid did not care. She dragged my heavy, massive body across the entire village, toward the river. I saw the blisters burst on her hands. I saw her grit her teeth, so hard the veins protruded on her neck. She was not a warrior by rank, but that night, she was braver than all the berserkers I had ever known. We found refuge in an old cave beneath a cliff, 3 miles from burned Leeds. It was damp and cold, but to us, it was a palace. The next 5 days turned into a nightmare. I tossed in fever. My wound turned foul, and the smell of rotting flesh filled the cave. Every time I opened my eyes, I saw her. She washed my wound with herbal brews she gathered in the forest under the fear of death. She chewed dry roots and bread she had miraculously saved, and put this mash into my mouth, because I could not even open my jaw. Once, in the blackest night, when the pain became so unbearable that I began to see Odin on his 8-legged horse, I grabbed her hand. "Leave me," I whispered. "Let me go. I am a killer, Estrid. My hand will never be clean. I deserve this." She looked at me with her huge eyes, where the fire of a small bonfire was reflected, and she slapped me. It was so unexpected that I fell silent for a moment. "You have no right to die," she hissed. "You destroyed my life, you killed my world, and now you want to just leave for your Valhalla and leave me here alone. No, Bjorn, you will live. You will live and feel every day of this life as atonement. You are all I have left. Do you hear me? All." In that moment, I understood that love is not only flowers and kisses. It is holding each other at the edge of the abyss. It is a cruel demand of another person that you do not give up. She did not forgive my sins, no. She forced me to carry them further, but to carry them together with her. On the 5th day, the fever retreated. I awoke and felt my heart beating steadily. Estrid slept beside me, pressed against my healthy side, to warm me with her body. She was so fragile, so exhausted. I looked at my hand. It was dirty, covered in scars, but it was alive. We had lost everything. We had no home, no money, no name. We were two shadows in the forests of Northumbria. But when the sun began to break through the entrance of the cave, I felt something I had never felt before. It was not the hope of rescue, no. It was the knowledge that as long as the two of us breathe the same air, the world has not been able to defeat us. We sat in that cave, embracing, and I knew that ahead of us lay hundreds of miles of unknown, cold, hunger, and eternal danger. But I also knew that I would never again take an axe to destroy. If I am to fight, it will be only for this breath beside me. This was our catharsis. In the fires of Leeds, Iron Bjorn, the murderer and raider, burned away. In this damp cave, just Bjorn was born, a man who finally understood the price of a single human life. And that price was higher than all the gold of Britain. We went west. 7 weeks we forced our way through thick forests and swamps, where every step could have been our last. My wound healed slowly, leaving a terrible, crimson scar on my side, a mark that will always remind me of the price of my freedom. I was no longer Iron Bjorn. I was just a man, limping on one leg, holding the hand of the woman who became my only compass in this cursed, yet beautiful world. We found our place in a valley forgotten even by the gods. It was a scrap of land on the edge of the mountains, where the wind always smelled of wild thyme, and the soil was so poor that no jarl or Saxon lord would ever want to fight for it. We built a mud hut there. It was crooked, with a roof made of turf, and in our first winter, we almost froze, clinging to each other like two abandoned puppies. But do you know what? It was the first winter of my life when I did not dream of bloody battles. I only saw the warmth of her skin. Here, I must tell you something I did not know myself back then, when I first decided to shield her from the rage of my comrades. I thought I was a great warrior who showed mercy to a simple peasant widow, letting her hide in that well while everything around us blazed. But one evening, when we had already settled in our valley and our first field began to show weak sprouts of rye, Estrid pulled a gold ring with strange engravings from her rags. It turned out she was the daughter of a chieftain, forcibly married to a Saxon to seal an alliance. Her own brother, greedy for power, had arranged her husband's death to seize their lands. And it was he, her own blood, who sent word to our Jarl Eric, pointing out the weakest spots in the defenses of Leeds. He hoped that we would tear the village apart, and that Estrid would die under our swords, leaving no heirs. I was merely a tool in her brother's hands, but fate decided differently. Instead of being her executioner, I became her shield, and she became my salvation. She was not just a victim of our raid. She was a victim of her own kin. And when I, an enemy and a killer, protected her, she felt not fear, but freedom for the first time in her life. She traded royal blood for calluses from a plow beside me. This truth struck me harder than any axe blow. We were both fugitives, both betrayed by our own, and that made our bond stronger than any steel. We lived in this valley for 35 years. My life changed forever. I threw my beadalest reward into a deep lake nearby. Let the fish admire its gleam. I needed it no more. Instead, my tools became the hoe and the sickle. Who would have thought that a great Viking, who once struck terror into the coasts, would be arguing with a neighboring shepherd over a goat that wandered into his garden? It was funny. Sometimes I laughed until I cried, looking at my rough hands, dirty with dung, not blood. It was honest work. Maybe a bit vulgar, because I smelled of cows now instead of the sea. But that smell was dearer to me than all the scent of glory. We had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. I gave them names that belonged to neither of our peoples. I wanted them to start with a clean slate. My eldest son, Harold, grew up strong as an oak, but in his hands there was no axe, but a building hammer. He builds houses where people live, not where they die. My youngest daughter, Sylvie, inherited her mother's eyes, just as proud and free. When I watched them laughing, running across the slopes of our valley, I realized that this is my true monument, not a runestone that will grow over with moss, but living blood that does not know the terror of war. Estrid, she was my son until the very end. Even when her hair became white as the snow on the mountain peaks, and her face was covered in a network of wrinkles, she remained that same girl with the bread knife who challenged death. She passed away 2 years ago, quietly in her sleep, holding my hand. I buried her under the great oak, where we first met the spring together in this valley. Sometimes I sit there, I talk to her. I tell her how our grandchildren are growing. I am certain she hears me. Now I am old. My bones ache with every rain, and my eyes no longer see as far as they used to. But there is no regret on my face. I look at my hands, they tremble, but they created life. I built a family from ash and hatred. It was my hardest battle, and I won. Do not seek glory in blood. Seek it in the gaze of the person waiting for you at home. The world will always be cruel and unfair, but you always have a choice, to be part of the darkness, or to light a small fire that will warm at least one person. My time is drawing to an end. The sun is setting behind the mountains, and the shadows are growing long. I close this diary and place it in the box. Maybe in hundreds of years, someone will find it and learn that even in the heart of the fiercest wolf, love can bloom. I am not afraid of what comes next. Valhalla, Helheim, I do not care. I am simply going to her. We will sit under our willow again, and no steel, no treason, no distance will ever separate us again. Be happy, traveler. Love desperately. It is the only thing that matters.